So we'll talk about construction of a schedule. I think one thing to remember is that there are two different tensions when it comes to staffing. On the one hand, we have financial constraints, and if we listen to those, we end up with leaner staffing grids and ones that are heavier on APPs. On the other hand, there are considerations that have to do with wellness, overtaxing, APPs and docs can lead to burnout, and burnout is not something that we want. It's a patient safety issue when there are too many patients for the providers to take care of. People don't get seen, sometimes sick people, that's a problem. Third issue, political. Left without being seen, long wait times would make it difficult for EMS to maintain its contracts. So here comes the tension, and this is why there are many different ways to analyze this data and come to a conclusion as to what is the best possible staffing grid. So when you actually are ready to look at how to schedule, you'd look at the third tab, the advisor tab. And what's the difficulty here? The primary difficulty is that we don't really know what those capacities are. We don't know what is the maximum capacity for a doctor and APP that would result in a productive doc or APP and no burnout. And we don't necessarily know which one of those numbers um, is different from site to site. That's not to say that we can't arrive at those. It would require additional work. We just don't have access to that right now. So how do we determine the max capacities, which are essential in order to be able to come up with a good schedule? We use a steady state, so we still rely on Gestalt. And the idea here is this. Think about a site that you work at clinically where you feel that 20% of the time you are overtaxed. You are seeing more patients than you are comfortable with. And you can use any of the three criteria we talked about. Whether it causes you stress and potential burnout, you come home exhausted, or you feel like you can reach the patients and they're not seen in an appropriate time and you're concerned about safety, or you see on the board that they are left without being seen, or long lengths of stay, and you feel this is going to adversely affect our practice. Doesn't matter which criterion, the concept is 80% of the time you're comfortable, 20% of the time you feel overtaxed. This is what the 80th percentile is, and if you can match the curves, then you will arrive at the right max capacities. So, I'll show you an example of how you do this for St. Joseph's Hospital. So, my personal experience of a hour that I work without APP help would help me figure out what is that number for docs. Now, again, we're looking at uneven RVU, which is not an intuitive number, which is going to be helpful because it's likely a more accurate representation of work demand, and we should try to use it even though it's not intuitive. But we're going to arrive at the max capacities anyway in a way that's fairly accurate. So, Franklin at 8 a.m., I work by myself, and I feel that 20% of the time there are too many patients for me to see, but 80% of the time I'm fairly comfortable. It's maybe different for different people, but that's a situation with me. Well, what's the data show? The data show that for 8 RVUs per hour, I am slightly off the mark, meaning I'm slightly over capacity. I have slightly more ability to deliver care than there's care needed. So if I do believe that this hour is 20% overtaxing, then my next step is to change the doc's max capacity to match the curves, to match the top of the bar to the middle of this line. So let's move down the max capacity a little bit to 7.5 and see where we are. And that's a little closer, and 7.4. It's a little closer, and 7.3. We're matching. So if I believe that if I believe that this hour 8 a.m. is a fair representation of the 80th percentile, I've just matched the curve for doctors. Now let's do this for APPs. Again, we need to find a site where they don't work with doctors so we can isolate what is going on. Let's pick TOSA. And I don't have an experience with TOSA, but let's just say hypothetically that at 2 p.m. Things are steady state. There's two providers and they feel only 20% of the time they're overtaxed, 80% of the time they're comfortable. So let's go through the same exercise here at 2 p.m. and try to match the curves. Here we need to lower the max capacity to match them again. And 5 seems to be really close to the number. Maybe 4.9 is a little better. Maybe 5. So at this point, we think we've arrived at max capacities for docs and APPs based on a steady state, a match between the supply and the demand at a particular time of the day that we have clinical experience and we can corroborate that 80% of the time it feels comfortable. This is as good as we get right now, and I do believe this is better than just staffing based on Gestalt, because you just focus on a single hour and then you can extrapolate the rest of the schedule. So once you've established the max capacities here for uneven RVUs, you go back to Joe's and you say, okay, well, this, if we believe these numbers, then that's how the schedule looks like at Joe's. It still has some areas that we think need improvement. There's a little bit of oversupply early in the morning and a little bit of undersupply early. Between 9 and 11, say. Next, we'll move to the builder schedule to see what we can do about that. So there's two ways to do this. Here we're displaying the optimal coverage. As a default, this will not schedule. Once you display the schedule, it would show you how you can construct a schedule that would work ideally to balance both the financial aspects, try to reduce expenditure as much as possible, and try to get ideal coverage. I didn't talk in the basics video about the financial weight, but you can, financial weight means there's equal weight to the coverage and to the finances, but you can give more weight to finances by increasing this number, and then you get more APP coverage, and you have a tendency for having less coverage. So again, as you increase the number, you'll notice that at some point you get to a point where the software will start understaffing. Actually, it's not really doing that right now, but you can give more weight to the financial aspects by increasing it. So there's sort of two ways of building a schedule. The first one is from scratch. I'll show you that, and then I'll show you the second method, which is using the Tangier schedule. So what I do with this method is you just build it layer by layer, come up with shift distributions that you think are reasonable. In practice, we do 6 a.m., so let's change it to 6. Let's change this to 2. Change this to 2. And then once you have that finished, you'd work on a second layer. So here, despite the fact we see that we need a second doctor at 8 a.m. So you'll do a second doctor at 8 a.m. and let's say you have them work till 4 p.m. That covers this area, and then you'll go back and say 4 p.m. till 11 p.m. You submit this, and now you solved sort of the doctor layer. We're not going to worry about these little squares. We're just going to cover them with APPs. So now you start with APP coverage. Now we have one that starts from 6 to 2, just like the doctor. Now they leave at the same time. You'll see a stagger. Shows up right over here. Instead, you can make him leave at 3, and then you have somebody coming at 3 and leaving at 11, and somebody coming, say, at 10 and leaving at 6. And let's see how that looks like. So we covered another layer. Now it shows we don't need an additional APP at 6 a.m. even though right now we have one. That we should schedule the next one at 7. So we'll have a 7 to 3 shifts, say, or 7 to 4 shifts, so we don't stagger. And this is how this looks like. Next we'll have a 4, say, to 2 a.m. shift. It's going to cover a bit, and then we have need another coverage at 9 a.m. Say we go till 9 p.m. Sort of get the idea. You cover it layer by layer. We need the next one at 11. Cover till 11. And now we start seeing that, you know, it gets a little trickier. We need a little bit of coverage between 11 and midnight, and we need more coverage at night. So if we have somebody, again, it's not ideal. You need to play around with this a bit, but you know, 11 to 5 would be a really unpopular shift, but you can see that it covers the squares that you need. And here we see the builder schedule is slightly better as far as coverage than the existing one. It's closer to 100. It's closer to the optimal coverage, but not quite there. The financial score is surprisingly not as good. It's slightly more expensive. We'll see on the bottom. But the stagger score is improved, meaning less people are leaving at the same time. And here we see what we have. We have a schedule that's going to cost 5.3 million annually, 5.381 versus a 5.329 with a difference $52,000. So we improved the coverage a bit, but it's costing us money. The idea is you keep playing around with these until you get optimal coverage and spend less. Option number 2 is work off the existing schedule. Let's clear the build and load the Tangier schedule. And here you see, okay, here's the problem. We need additional hours between 9 and noon. And maybe we could do less a little bit later at night, particularly 8 to 10 p.m. That's going to be a little tricky to do, but let's try. So let's say instead of having the 4 doc leave at 11, they leave at 10. So again, $82,000 in savings annually for slightly improved coverage score. So that gets us a little bit closer to where we want to go. Now we need a little bit more APP coverage early in the morning. So what can we do? That somebody that's coming at noon, say they came at 10. And that improves the coverage score. Now we're spending a bit more money. Again, the idea is you'll keep playing with this until you get as close as possible to the perfect coverage without spending as much. How can we spend less? So there's really lots of options. One is we can agree that we're not going to be comfortable 80% of the time. We'll be comfortable 75% of the time, and 25% of the time we will be a little busy. And now the numbers will look a bit different, and the coverage that we need be slightly different, and maybe we don't really need an additional doc or APP at 9 p.m., definitely not at 8 p.m. So that does change things a bit and allow us to reduce coverage at 8 a.m. We don't need a second provider. Now we can bring them in at 9 and find better coverage that way. So hopefully this explains the general method. I'd say the departures from this are, we know at All Saints Hospital we staff differently than we do at other sites. We made assumptions that we need more providers for the same number of EDWUs per hour, right? We didn't have any RVU data prior to January 1st, and we still probably don't have enough data to really have RVU-based staffing there. It remains an open question whether RVUs will provide sufficient information for us to staff accurately there. Meaning, if we use the same doc and APP caps as we do everywhere else, and have RVU-based staffing that arrives at a comfortable staffing grid, then we can still assume that RVUs are a good representation of work demand on the doctors. What if we can't do that? What if it turns out that using RVUs leads to a very uncomfortable schedule and we have to staff more? Then it means that this model is not 100% accurate and we need to add something else to the mix. Maybe it's admit rate, maybe it's something else, maybe it's the percent of patients coming by ambulance, maybe age is an independent factor. We'll have to look at that. We'll have to see how we can understand better how the data works when we get enough RVU data for All Saints Hospital. And I would suppose that whatever the answer ends up being, it will teach us a lot more about how to staff any future sites. So every one of those that we learn from, the likelihood of making an error on future sites will be smaller. Likewise, the applicability of ShiftBuilder to new groups that we don't know. If we sell this product, it's likely to work much better out of the box if we can understand how it works for our sites. Email me if you have any questions or concerns. And I already have probably roughly a dozen ideas for how to improve this software. A lot of those ideas maybe you've come up with. Email me just in case I didn't think of them. The limitation to development only has to do with time, energy, resources that are available for us for spending this kind of time. So I'm looking forward to presenting better versions of this in the future. Thank you.